Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second installment of our Demystifying Procurement and Diversifying the Supply Chain series, Building Resilient Communities, Social Enterprises, and Procurement. I am Stephanie Day, Director of Research Partnerships at the Diversity Institute, and I'm delighted to be opening this session. For anyone wishing to listen to a live French translation, please select the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen and choose the French translation option. While we meet today virtually, I would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. I am joining you from Ottawa today, so I acknowledge the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. Our regional hubs and partners across Canada similarly on their traditional territory of many Indigenous nations who have cared for these lands since time immemorial. Let us take a moment to recognize the many traditional lands on which we are connecting and acknowledge with gratitude and respect the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people whose footsteps were first to mark these lands. The Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, or WEC, call it, works across the country through 10 regional hubs in English to share research on and research for women entrepreneurs in Canada. Drawing on the expertise network that includes more than 250 organizations, we also host and support programming that highlights opportunities and best practices for women entrepreneurs and the organizations that support them. Today, our conversation brings entrepreneurship, social enterprises, and social procurement. We are thrilled to have Mason join us to speak of the current and future state of social enterprise. Tina Dason is the Stephen J. Smith Chair of Strategy and Organizational Behavior and the Director of the Community Impact Research Program at the Smith School of Business at Queen's University. Tina's current teaching is in the areas of AI, bias and ethics, diversity, inclusion, strategy, resilience, social impact, and inclusive leadership. I invite everyone here today to submit any questions you may have for Professor Dason through the Q&A box. Welcome, Tina.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you for all the organizers and for hosting us today to have this important conversation. I have to tell you at the outset something that I told folks at our pre-meeting is that we only have a brief time together, and I'm a recovering social entrepreneurship scholar. I used to really love this work. I've spoken at the Skull World Forum multiple times. I've tried to define and critique this space early on, about 15 years ago or more. And what I've found is things have changed deeply for me, and I'll speak about that in a moment. Together with Jerry Davis at the University of Michigan, we've organized a group to do domain building called Community of Social Innovation. And this was basically to mentor young junior scholars in this space and to bring them together because it wasn't really recognized as a valid domain of inquiry for the longest time in business schools. And just as another side, for 10 years, I ran the Center for Social Impact, and now I'm directly focused on community research and community revitalization, looking at how communities bring back culture and traditions. I'm just going to take a moment to share my slide deck with you, and then we'll get going there. So just there we go. Okay. And so, as I said, I'm a recovering social entrepreneurship scholar. I'm severely cynical about this space. For me, it's very hard to understand impact more generally. I don't think we have enough on that. There's a lot of hype, and we need to separate branding from bridging. When I got excited about social entrepreneurship many years ago, it was because of the bridging aspect. I really liked the fact that social entrepreneurs would bridge their ideology, their passion for change, and bridge that to so many different types of communities and products and processes and outcomes. And I think what's happening now is I see a lot of affordances being given to elites with little to no auditing of claims of impact that are done. So that's just my the position that I come from. And so now I've spent a lot of the last 3 to 5 years studying community impact, collective action as it takes place in rural and remote communities, because I think that they really need a lot of our attention. So what I'm going to do in the next 12 to 15 minutes is talk about definitional issues, some challenges and myths that exist. I've pulled together some research, some insights, some trends that I see happening, and then also speak a little bit about policy implications of what needs to be done here. So where I see social enterprises is that they sit in the space in between. And maybe this has always been something that has plagued this field, because when you're in between, you're neither one or the other. And so social enterprises operate with a commercial logic, a profit logic, but also a social logic that was embodied. I put nonprofit up here, but that's a real definitional concern, is they have the logic of what nonprofits had been doing and doing for many, many years. In 2010, we published a piece that defined social enterprises as entities that involved earned income activities to address social needs in a sustainable way. This manuscript in 2020 received an award from the Academy of Management for the highest cited manuscript on social entrepreneurship in the past 10 years. And that was because we took on head on this whole notion of definitional problems. And there's 3 reasons why we have issues about definitions. One is that people have different frames or lenses by which they approach social enterprise research and work in general. One is that originally, when foundations and other granting agencies said that nonprofits had to be financially viable, social enterprise was seen as a way or a means to make nonprofits financially self-sustainable. The second is where a lot of academics hung their hat. Social enterprise is a social value maximization and makes profit making secondary. So it's really important to understand that there's a hierarchy here in this definition, a hierarchy that is often not looked at. We often see them as combative logics or logics that often aren't in that hierarchical notion. And then finally, I know a lot of folks who call themselves social entrepreneurs, but I call them also social entrepreneurs as activists, economic, political, social system transformation. And so when we look at these different types of frames, we can see many different types of forms of social enterprise that also come about. These are things like everything from a fee-for-service model. So if you go back to early days, thinking about an organization such as Vision Spring that would provide glasses to people who couldn't afford them, or employment models such as Greyston Bakery that employs the hard to employ people just coming out of prison. We can see that there's these 3 different frames, but then there's also probably a dozen different ways to articulate and realize social enterprise in its many different forms. And I think that's been difficult, especially when we think about the legislative and regulatory perspective, because people are confused about what this is. The other thing that I've been thinking about a lot is different challenges that we see in this space. So the first one I think we've covered off. In fact, social entrepreneurship scholars spent the first decade arguing about this and not really researching as much as we could. The second challenge is, how do we balance social impact or balance even profit growth with impact? So perhaps one of the best researchers in this space is a fellow named Alnur Ibrahim, and he's written a bunch of papers, and you can find them online, where he talks about the need to balance management tensions that stem from the push and pull of social economic goals with economic growth. The other thing I often see is this momentum of celebrity. And I saw it I went to the School World Forum for about 5 years in a row. And I've stopped going for a number of years, almost as many. And what I would see there is this momentum of celebrity, this pull of prizes. And I see this in the Canadian landscape as well. People love to be recognized. There's nothing wrong with that. But what happens is once you become recognized as a celebrity in this space, there's a momentum that gets associated with it. And you win one prize, and then you win another, and then you win another. And there's almost a sequencing of prizes that you can get. And Georgia Kehane has written a really great book on social entrepreneurship, and she talks about this notion about the pull of prizes. I think the fourth challenge is that we know very little about failure because it is antithetical to the momentum of celebrity. We don't celebrate failures. So we know little about failure, but even less about impact and whether or not the social enterprises that we tout, are they really having impact on the audiences that they claim to help and have impact upon. And then finally, this one I've touched on very, very lightly, but what I've seen in my work in communities in the last 3 to 5 years is that social enterprises are easily co-opted into the agenda of elites. And we need to be mindful of that, whether it's elite philanthropic foundations or charities, or whether it is just simply very wealthy individuals that are, going into communities and saying they're building social businesses. But if you pull the veil back and look really closely, that's not what's really happening. And that's very, very disillusioning and contributes a lot to my cynicism about this space. And so another article from a number of years back is that the trend is the exploitation of social entrepreneurship to privilege profits and power of private interests over social needs and justice. And so I think that we need to think seriously about how do we audit the claims of doing well, doing good? How is negative impact being assessed? So if you're an elite and you go into a community, how do we assess that you're really benefiting the community versus only benefiting your own charity or your own charitable foundation? And we really need to be thinking deeply about that. How is a community gaining from the multitude of social businesses being set up in their self-interest or their behalf? And so that's something that I'd like to see that we do more of. And now there's 2 myths that I really want to touch on as we come a little bit almost halfway through. The first myth is that it's easy to break into the social enterprise space in Canada. And I think everyone can start a social enterprise if they want to, but they need to know that the social enterprise community in Canada is very close-knit. It's very cliquey. I'll probably get lots of backlash on this and on Twitter. It's okay. I think there's no problem to start one, but if you want to be really successful, you need to be plugged into that community. And it's very difficult, very, very difficult. It's not easy to do. You need to connect in with the right networks. You need to know the right people. You need to be invited to the right events, and on and on and on. And what I'm saying may not be popular, but it's one reason that I chose to exit. And so maybe it's not a myth, maybe it's only my reality, but I'll share that with you. And then another one was PK and I had this chat about women in this space. And I put here myth, and then I qualified it by saying perhaps, because to be honest, we don't have data, good data on this, that women are overrepresented in the social enterprise space. Perhaps it could look like that, it could seem like that. There are some reasons why it goes beyond anecdote though. The drivers of female social entrepreneurship and gendered social entrepreneurship is that we basically have seen from research that's there, and I've got some ideas here that I wrote down, is that we have research that shows that traits of benevolism and interest in common well-being are actually very, very important traits in social entrepreneurship. And these traits are often also associated with female social entrepreneurs. That female social entrepreneurs are motivated through a desire for independence, self-actualization, and implementation of their own values and beliefs. And feminist beliefs such as a desire for equity and social justice drives women into this space. It may not keep them there, because we have the first myth that I identified, but it certainly propels them to engage in this space, and that's super important. And what we're finding now is that in many cases, and especially since the pandemic, there have been many, many work, life, family issues that compound each other. And so, things such as childcare, the availability of part-time employment, the lack of paternal and maternal leave in many, many sectors. And so as a result, entrepreneurship is the only option for many people to enter the workspace. So I think it's really interesting to look at that. And again, I think that there's more research that needs to be done. What I did find, an article in 2021 by Garcia Lomas and Gabaldon says that the social enterprise space is the gender gap is decreasing, that men represent about 55% of social entrepreneurs and women representing 45%. So that gap is certainly decreasing. So where are we seeing some exciting trends and opportunities happening? So I have sent over to the folks at today a resource. We published a paper, I think a year or two ago, on community and collective social innovation. So that can be shared with you. And for me, the rise of community enterprise and community social innovation is really, really interesting. How do small communities come together and change the community itself? How do they create social innovation at that level of community, and how it's important? What we find more and more is it's the same thing that benefits social enterprise in general. It's the role of social capital in communities and markets. And so just like communities, social capital is really important for social entrepreneurs, and also since COVID. So what we've found is that a lot of social enterprises have sprung up during COVID and pivoted. And what's really interesting is there's been a lot of research. If you're interested, reach out to me. I can share with you some really interesting pieces that have been written. One of them by a good friend and colleague, Sophie Bach, and her research collaborator, Tom Lumpkin. They've written a really interesting article on the impact of COVID on social entrepreneurship. And one of the things I think, they ask a set of really important questions, so that to what extent can social entrepreneurs who manage complex relationships in the first place, are they able to manage relationships that have such global significance, such as COVID? Because that a lot of social entrepreneurs, when they manage relationships, they do so locally. And so now when you're having to think of a pandemic that's global and keeping your eye on that higher order level, how does that impact your relationships locally? So what we've seen is a lot of social enterprises pivot into the healthcare sector, providing information, providing resources, helping with vaccination campaigns and things like that. The other thing we also have is social enterprises emerging relating to racial inequality and inequity. So one social enterprise based in London in the UK is taking time dedicated only to systemic injustice, dismantling racial inequalities and trying to bring communities together. And it was founded by Yvonne Field in 2014, called the Ubele Initiative, and trying to bring people together. It's a grassroots social enterprise to actually, during COVID, hold the government accountable, because we know that COVID led to such systemic injustices, and actually didn't lead to it, but it made it more salient, if I will. We see lots of social enterprises in the area of sustainability and climate change. And then we have AI and social enterprise, which I'm really excited about. I've been working with a couple of people in Europe on this, looking at AI for good, and especially in the domain of agriculture and farming, looking at areas where AI could be used to enhance crop yields, for example. And then most recently, we've been engaged in a project with Indigenous Clean Energy in Canada, which is a social enterprise and not-for-profit platform that advances Indigenous inclusion. And one of the areas that we're partnering with ICE at Queen's is in their Catalyst program, which is enhancing the National Clean Energy Capacity Building Program for Indigenous individuals. And so this has been a really exciting project for us. It's a new project, but we love the community aspect of it. And it was very, very important for us to do this. I see there's some stuff in the chat, so I'll go to that in just a moment. And so some of the implications, I think, for policymakers, I just want to take a moment to speak about, and I don't want to run out of time, so I'll make sure I get through it quickly. So the first is navigating the differences in frames and forms. And I think policymakers need to be cognizant of this, especially if we want to be able to have effective regulatory frameworks in this space. As I've mentioned earlier, I think we have a huge need for accountability. We really need to think about what is being done on the ground, and are we really holding people to that higher level of standard that we expect and should be demanding in this space. I'd like to see Canada move more towards support in rural and remote communities. I find that so much of it is centered Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, Ottawa, big cities, but very, very little talk about what can be done in rural and remote areas. And I think as a country, we need to come together and do that. And so now I want to end with sort of this thing about why does Canada lag? And we know that in most studies, like I pulled off maybe half a dozen here, that Canada lags behind many, many countries in this space. And why is this so? And especially lagging behind the UK. The UK to me has always been the gold standard. You look at what the UK is doing, and they're doing a lot of it really well. It's the most advanced in terms of a policy framework. They have a flexible legal definition of social entrepreneurship. There's government funding, lots of support. But in fact, the social enterprises in the UK most often don't rely on that type of funding. Whereas another social enterprise I talked to this week, you know, it's death by 1,000 cuts. You're constantly writing grants and constantly seeking financial support. So I would say the UK has a very mature legal framework for social enterprises. But in Canada, we lack that larger legal framework. And we need to think about all kinds of things like taxes. And we need to think about, you know, if you're going to start a social enterprise, would you start one as a nonprofit, or would you start one as a for-profit? Which makes more sense if you want to pay yourself a decent salary? How would you do that, and how would you set things up? I'd suggest also that folks take a look. Dan Overall out in Calgary has written a paper in 2021. It's available on Google, and he's written some interesting things suggesting creating a new separate legal definition for social enterprises and how we might go about doing that in Canada today. And so I think I'll leave it with that and stop sharing and see if there are any questions, or maybe I'll just visit the chat for a moment. Excellent. Look at that. So Scandinavian countries, do I know what's being done in terms of Scandinavian? No, but I did pull out a bunch of data on South Korea when I started to look into this. So I think it's a really interesting question. So thank you for the comments. Would you incorporate as a hybrid community contribution company? Yes, the UK more advanced and feminist enterprise. Totally agree with that. And yes, Janice, it's exactly rural and remote communities are left behind and reduced to being seen as farming or fishing related enterprises. And people have basically just forgotten about them. I agree. Thank you. So social capital, Jacinta, great question. Yes, it is who we know, the wealth of our connections. So not just our network, but the word capital implies the wealth of the connections that we have. So that's terrific. Thank you. And oh my gosh, so many things here. So we'll just maybe leave a challenge 5. How does a startup social enterprise get operational funding outside of this. This is where our collective is at the moment. So I will, perhaps you and I can reach out and have a quick chat about that. I'm looking at the interest of time. I'm 1 minute over to keep everybody on time. So thank you, everyone, so very, very much. And I'll stay till the end of this. Thank you.
Wow, Tina, thank you so much. I know there was quite a few questions. We definitely we can sure to get, so it helps us to get those responses out to everyone.
Yes.
That was a very engaging, insightful presentation. I really enjoyed the myths, especially about Canada being highly networked. And I have to plug in WEC because that's really one of the beauties of WEC, that it's that one-stop shop where anybody come in and get connected. And you know, those connections are. So a lot of value in WEC, and Tina, thank you so much for that presentation.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Moving on, we've got a great line. So next, I'm really happy to introduce Tori Williamson, Director of Education and Communications at Social Canada, as our next speaker. Tori has a passion for understanding the systems around us and working collaboratively on community-centered solutions. She believes in people and the power of shifting perspectives and objectives to create monumental change. Welcome, Tori.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you so much for having me today. It's wonderful to be here with you all. Let me get my screen share up. Great. So I'm joining you today from Squamish territory, and I work for Social Canada. I'm going to be speaking about social enterprise and social procurement. But first, a little bit about Social Canada. We are a social enterprise with the mission to advance and grow social procurement. We believe that the purchasing of goods and services are more than an economic transaction. They are the means to build community capital, the foundation of healthy, vibrant communities. We are social procurement leaders and work with social value suppliers, all levels of government, institutions, businesses, and communities to help harness the power of purchasing with impact. Social procurement leverages a social value from your existing procurement. So let's explore a little bit more about what that means. I've got here an example of the scale of procurement just from Canada's federal government purchasing. So annually, there's about $20 billion purchased in goods and services, and there's $200 billion over the next 10 years in infrastructure. And about 80% of that purchasing happens at the regional and local level. That's a large amount of spend happening just from the federal government and not even considering corporations and institutions and small businesses. These purchases include things like building maintenance and cleaning, professional services, food services, office supplies, repairs and construction, landscaping, and pretty much anything you can imagine. Traditionally, procurement is viewed through the lens of economic value. So it consists of the purchaser value and the supplier value, and is a transactional equation. But social procurement is encouraging a shift towards procurement based on achieving multiple outcomes in addition to maximizing financial value. When we include a social value component in the equation, we're now creating value not just for the purchaser and the supplier, but also value for the entire community. And this becomes a much more holistic way to think about the impacts of your purchasing and to create value. The evolution of procurement is very long. Trading between communities has been around for thousands of years. First Nations and Indigenous peoples have traded their products across and amongst families, tribes, regions, and cultures. Things like dried fish from the coast for maize and sweetgrass from the prairies, gems and stones for shells and quills, always to enhance each other's lives. But with the colonization of North America came a different marketplace model, one based upon extraction and exploitation. Over the last several hundred years, our culture shifted towards an ideology that told us that the invisible hand of the free market would unintentionally advance the interests of society. But we saw in the 1960s and 70s that this was leading to massive environmental degradation. And so procurement start to think about not just price and quality in their evaluations, but also about the environmental impacts and with the green consideration. Now in the 2000s, we're recognizing that we can take into account the impacts on people and communities in our purchasing decisions. So along with price, quality, and green, we're now considering the social value impacts. Social procurement seeks best value because every purchase has an economic, environmental, and social impact, whether intended or not. And when we focus on best value for money, procurement is much more than a financial transaction. Procurement becomes a tool for building healthy communities. Healthy communities are built on community capital. And it's great that we had the question about social capital earlier, because as you can see here, social capital is part of the community capital framework. Community capital is not just economic capital, but this is still important as it's the income, finances, and capital that helps our resources move and flow. But it's also the physical capital, the natural and manufactured environment around us that shapes our communities. It's the cultural capital, so culture, diversity, respect, places for different voices and perspectives to be celebrated and acknowledged. It's also human capital, the skills, learning, and training that individuals can gain in order to contribute to their communities. And it's a social capital. This is really the glue that holds our communities together through things like families, institutions, and networks. And social enterprises maximize community capital because as a business, they generate the majority of their revenue through the sales of goods and service with a defined social and cultural or environmental goal that's embedded within the operation. And the majority of profits are reinvested into the social objective. So this means that the mission is coming before the money. You know, this is going to be the priority is to create that community impact and maximize community capital. This is the definition that Biosocial Canada uses, and it's aligned with Social Enterprise World Forum, AKINA in New Zealand, Social Traders in Australia, and Social Enterprise UK. This is kind of our way of putting our chip in the sand with that definition debate that Tina was referencing. In order to showcase social enterprises that do meet that definition, we offer social enterprise certification. So organizations can become certified by Biosocial Canada. They'll be listed on our directory, which you're all welcome to explore. It features social enterprises across the country. And if anybody has any questions about that, feel free to reach out to me. Here are some great examples of certified social enterprises from across the country. Embers provides temporary staffing in Vancouver, and over the past 18 years, they've helped thousands of people face barriers to work, lead productive and fulfilling lives. Eva's Print Shop uses the revenue from their commercial printing in order to help reinvest the profits back into their shelter system and the youth that they serve. Mission Impossible provides cleaning and maintenance services, and their transitional employment program guides people from facing barriers to employment into permanent positions. When we're thinking about social procurement, we like to use the concentric circle model. We center social enterprises in the center of the model. So if you're looking to purchase goods or services, is there a social enterprise that can provide that? But if there's not, and maybe there's not available in your area, you can still create social value in your purchasing. You can look for local businesses with a social value in the next ring, or regional businesses with a social value. Local businesses who are women-owned or diverse-owned can create social value through their work. So thinking about what are your priorities for your community and how can you align that with your purchasing? We also think about the supply chain. So if you're buying a big thing like a construction project, what are the different levels of purchasing that are going to happen beyond just the tier 1 direct contract? Social procurement creates impact in community, but what does this look like? Akira Property Management did a study, and they found that their social enterprise found that for every $1 spent with a target employment group, so group facing barriers, the social return on investment through savings through things like housing, supports, food services, savings on the judicial system was $4.13. So a huge return on investment by providing employment opportunities for people facing barriers. There's also the economic impact of working with local suppliers. So thinking about local economic development, Local BC found the economic multiplier effect that for every $100 spent with a local business, $63 is reinvested locally, whereas for every $100 spent with a multinational corporation, only $14 is reinvested locally. So thinking about how do we recirculate our money within our community in order to create ongoing benefits. Social procurement is a great opportunity for you as a business owner to think about ways to put community impact into place through things that you're already buying. It provides you a competitive edge if you're bidding or selling your services by telling people these are our own purchasing practices. It gives you increased access to suppliers, unique skills training, improved productivity and efficiency, enhanced reputation internally and externally, and increased staff retention through satisfaction in the workplace, really putting purpose into practice with your purchasing. Social procurement is emerging across Canada. We see the federal government active in policies and pilots for purchasing of goods and services, community employment benefits from Infrastructure Canada on certain infrastructure projects, looking for targeted employment. Municipalities really leading the way with a variety of policies and programs that are designed to really benefit their community and meet their community goals through their purchasing. Institutions like housing organizations, universities, and tourism organizations are also thinking about how can they better serve the communities they're already working with. And corporations are also, like Chandos Construction and SAP, putting this into practice and making commitments to what amount of spend going to social enterprise. By making that commitment, there's a huge opportunity to increase business for social enterprise if you can get into those corporation supply chains. If you'd like to learn more about social procurement, we have a ton of information on our website. We publish free open source guides as part of our mission. And so these are available for you to download, and I encourage you to explore them. If you're interested from the demand side, so what your own purchasing is, you can check out the introductory guide to social procurement and then the more deeper implementation social value menu. If you're interested on the supply side of how you can sell your services as a social enterprise or a women-owned business to access purchasing from social procurement purchasers, then the supplier guide to social procurement is a great tool. We offer training for suppliers on procurement and storytelling and an in-depth purchaser program if you're interested in learning more. So there's lots of supports. If you're ever interested in learning anything else about social procurement, we're social procurement leaders. We can really do anything to help you, and we're really excited for you to connect and engage with this fantastic opportunity to harness the power of your purchasing. Okay, I'll stop my share. See if there are any questions. Should I hop in the Q&A, Stephanie, or hand it over to you? I don't see any questions. I'll hand it to you.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic, very informative, and really wonderful to learn more about the work Buy Social Canada does to support social enterprises and promote social procurement. It's my pleasure now to open the floor for an exciting panel discussion. Moderating our panel today is PK Much, the founder and acting publisher of Beth Media. PK is a serial, operationally experienced, award-winning social entrepreneur. Over to you, PK.
Okay, thank you so much, Stephanie. And hello, everyone. My name is PK Much, and I'm so excited to be part of this and part of this conversation. I too am a recovering social entrepreneur, although I don't think I have entirely recovered yet, and I haven't left the space entirely yet. I really appreciated Tina's presentation and Tori's presentation as well. And the two sort of highlighted the two things we're trying to bring together in the panel. So basically the idea of social enterprise and its ability to, as a sector, to advance equity and social justice in the commerce and business space, but also where we are in social enterprise development in Canada, which is lagging in the world. And then also over here on the topic of procurement and how to leverage procurement as a way of advancing equity for equity-seeking groups by buying from and by basically procuring from goods and services from those entrepreneurs as a way of leveling the economic playing field. So our panel today, which I'm going to introduce briefly all of our panelists in the interest of time, because we only have only so much time to go through, and we have a lot of dialogue and questions we want to go through. And so let me take a moment to introduce who we have and why we brought them here. So, and maybe the panelists could turn on their video when I mention your names, or now if you like. So first of all, we have Natasha Freitas, CEO and co-founder of Needs List, which is a global B2B marketplace connecting local nonprofits, working with displaced persons, with NGOs, INGOs, and corporate donors to create efficiency and transparency in the humanitarian aid system. Natasha has 20 years in the social enterprise space, but about 5 or 6 years, if I got that correct, Natasha, founding and leading Needs List. And I wanted Natasha on this panel because of her international experience and outlook as to bring some insight into procurement and social enterprise from that perspective. We also have Anne Jamieson. Hi, Anne, I see you there. And Anne is the Senior Manager, Toronto Enterprise Fund, based out of the United Way, Toronto. She launched the Canadian Conference on Social Enterprise series in 2004. So she's been in this space a long time as well, and is a founding member of Social Enterprise Council of Canada and chairs the Ontario Social Economy Roundtable. And she is also involved with the Toronto Community Benefits Network. So bringing together actually 3 topics we've already touched on, which is procurement, social enterprise, and community. And she presents regularly in this space, and her background is in small business development and, for contrast, international commerce finance. And so we'll be hearing more about what Social Enterprise Canada is thinking about, and also the Ontario Social Economy Roundtable. And next, I want to introduce Hermine Bondo. Hi, Hermine. She is the CEO of B for Brand. It's a storytelling-driven marketing agency for purpose-driven brands. And what she does and her team does is turn compelling stories into high-quality content to educate, inspire, and connect with people while creating social impact. So Hermine is a relatively kind of past the startup phase, but early in her company's development as a service-based social enterprise. So we thought that would be cool to have your perspective here, Hermine. And last but not least, by any means, we have Madeline Shaw, who is the co-founder and director of partnerships and impact from Isle. Isle makes period products for everybody, and they regularly spotlight trans and gender non-conforming models and sell boxer brief period underwear amongst, and actually Isle, formerly known as Luna Pads, was founded in 1993. So you are also a vet. But I also want to mention that Madeline has just released this new book called, and I encourage everyone to get a copy, The Greater Good, Social Entrepreneurship for Everyday People Who Want to Change the World. And she has a lot of insights as a manufacturer around procurement, someone who has to buy a lot of goods in order to sell and make what they sell. So that's our panel today. And I want to kick this off with Natasha, and just start with you and ask you, would you agree with Tina's assessment of the social enterprise space?
Absolutely. As I was listening, I felt like my whole experience has been one lived story to reflect her cynicism. So I applaud you, Tina, for doing that research. I think it absolutely reflects really, at the end of the day, what I'm seeing as a gap between the dialogue and the checks. So when we incorporated, there was like all this attention on investing in women entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs and technology addressing global challenges. And it was very intentional that we incorporated as a for-profit, as a mission-driven for-profit, in order to access that capital. And you know, it just blew my mind how challenging it was. I didn't expect it to be easy, but and we were successful. We did raise $1 million. But I'm also very cognizant of the fact that not only was it the hardest thing I've ever done, like besides childbirth, but I'm a white woman, I have university degrees, I have tremendous social capital. I had a partner who could help support me at home while I took this tremendous pay cut, and it still nearly destroyed me. So I think we have to be really aware of that when we're supporting social entrepreneurs, because there's a lot of, you know, little bits of capital out there, and this problem of like pitting social entrepreneurs against each other for $20,000 in prizes. But we really have to change the way we think about it. We have to stop taking this Silicon Valley model and apply it to this field where we need to collaborate and support one another. And I think actually one of the best ways we can do that as social entrepreneurs is be aware of where we spend our own money. So we actually put together this whole spreadsheet of looking at where all our resources are going, how many of them are going to women, how many of them are going to BIPOC-owned business, and are very conscious in trying to lift up each other, because we absolutely need to expand the pie and the playing field for all of us.
Yeah, all right, great. Thank you so much for that, Natasha. And yeah, as we kind of further, I might sort of harvest in mind everyone's experience in the space in general before we dive further into operational things like procurement. And so let me start with you next, Ermine. Your agency works with social enterprises by design. And so what challenges do you find your clients face as social enterprises? And does any of that fit with what Tina was also laying out in terms of the social enterprise space?
Thanks, PK, and thanks for having me. So yes, when I started Before Brand, I really wanted to support the causes I care about. So to be able to choose my clients just as much as they choose me. And I would say from a marketing perspective, what I've noticed, like obviously like small business owners, they go through lots of challenges, but when it really comes to social entrepreneurs, one of the best business advice that you can give to someone, at least that someone gave me early on, is you need to have a unique value proposition. So basically telling your ideal customer what problems you solve and how you do it differently. So pretty much everyone should have a unique value proposition. But when it comes to social entrepreneurs, they also, and this is something that I find some of my clients struggle with, is to tell the impact value proposition, because you're not just trying to attract the right people, but you're also trying to create social value. And how are you going to tell that story? And how you're going to own that story. So one of the challenges from a marketing perspective is really like for some of my clients to tell the impact story. So this is something I think every social entrepreneurs early on should think about and should really own that story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great insight, right? So how can you strengthen a social enterprise or the space when social entrepreneurs have trouble telling that story and also showing the impact that they actually have, which you obviously help them do. And let me go to Anne here, because you've got the national picture, but also the Ontario picture. What are those organizations that you're involved with thinking deeply about when it comes to advancing the social enterprise space?
Well, a lot of the work that both the Social Enterprise Council of Canada and the Ontario Social Economy Roundtable have done over the last sort of umpteen years, one was born in 2007 and the other one was born in the early 2010s, so they've been around for a while, is a holistic policy framework that supports social enterprises. We recognize that social enterprises do fall into that in-between space. And 10, 15 years ago, they didn't have any kind of support specifically for them. So a lot of our work has been focused on a policy framework that consists of 6 pillars that kind of shouldn't be disaggregated, but quite often are. Quite often it looks like a laundry list, but in fact it is a holistic vision of the types of supports that social enterprises need across the country. And they're very simple: access to capital, access to markets, access to skills building, ability to join into networks and convene as we're doing here, an adequate regulatory framework from all levels of government. And there's one other that I've totally forgotten, but it is also, demonstrating the value of social enterprises. So that comes to this: how do you measure impact? How do you demonstrate impact? So it really does relate a lot to the things that PK and some of my fellow panelists have already talked about. And we've spent many years kind of promoting this framework, and have worked with some governments, including the federal government and many provincial governments, to help them develop social enterprise strategies. In some cases, we've been successful. In other cases, we've failed. And in some cases, we found that governments like to pick and choose. They, they look at this, they look at our holistic six-pillar framework and say, well, we can do this, but not these other 5 things. And that doesn't really help. It's really a holistic strategy that would be help all different social enterprises. But we're seeing more and more traction. So unlike Tina and you, Natasha, I have hope that that we will see changes over time. It's very slow, but I have hope that we will see those changes and that we will be able to build a much more robust social enterprise economy.
Right. Okay, so I'm going to ask a follow-up question, Anne, if that's all right. We want to have social enterprises because of the work that they do and the ripple effects that the social entrepreneurs have. Yet we have a weak social enterprise legal framework scenario, and we haven't really, Canada has not produced a very strong social enterprise sector, as we already heard from Tina and know relative to the UK and so on. So in those organizations, what is the prospect of having a Canadian legal framework for social entrepreneurs in the next 5 years?
Yeah, I would say it's mixed. At the federal level, I'm not seeing a lot of movement towards a legal framework that fits with social enterprises. We have seen some developments at the provincial level. We have the community, the 3C in British Columbia and the CIC in Nova Scotia. That could be one way of addressing some of the issues. We have B Corps, but not all B Corps necessarily are driven by their social mission. So that's not necessarily the answer. But we are, and on the nonprofit side, we're seeing some interest in moving the legislation or the regulatory environment to make it easier for both nonprofits and charities to run commercial enterprises, as they're called. But it's not been very, it hasn't moved as far as one would like it to move. And over the next 5 years, I think it's going to be, we're going to have mixed results. I would not prognosticate that we're going to have a national structure for social enterprises in the next 5 years, but we may have more provincial ones, and we may have some more flexibility in the nonprofit stroke charity space for social enterprises.
Okay, great. And I'm just going to throw in a quick thing here for our audience of 75 people. Let's just get a read on, before I ask Madeline an introductory question, let's get a read on how big. I'm going to ask those watching the seminar in the chat, and also ask our speakers or our panelists, what percentage of the economy is the social enterprise space? So if government represents, 25 or 23% of GDP, and private sector, nonprofit sector, let's just put everybody quietly write down a little number and say, what percent of our economic universe in Canada are made up of social enterprises, for-profit social enterprises in particular, because it gets muddy when we're talking about nonprofit social enterprises. Let's see what numbers come up. So audience, go ahead and give it a shot. And let me start with Natasha. What number would you put on that?
Oh, I'm in cynicism mode. I'm going to go with under 1%, but hopefully you'll prove me wrong.
Okay, Hermine, you want to give it a guess?
5.
Okay. I'm going to go to Madeline, then end with Anne.
I was going to say 5 as well, but I'm an optimist.
Okay, all right. Anne, you get to round up the rear, and we see in the audience here under 2, 2, 3, 1, 5.
I would agree with the 1%, but I would say that includes nonprofit social enterprises as well as for-profit social enterprises.
So audience, thank you for that. And someone said 20. Okay, you've been out-optimistized, Madeline. But I wanted to draw that out because the social enterprise space really punches above its weight in media and in engage, right? So someone earlier in the chat said their incubator is mostly women, and there's lots of social enterprise entrepreneurship programs and incubators and so on. So it's interesting to note that after, let's say, a good 20 years of real emphasis on it, we're still at that 1 to 3% as a segment of the economy, which makes it interesting from the procurement conversation. So let me go to Madeline for a moment. And as someone who has actually built, you have a manufacturing enterprise. You buy stuff to make stuff and sell it. And so maybe we could get you to weigh in just as a social enterprise an experienced person on your thoughts on the space, but also what you found maybe changing over the last 20 years as a social entrepreneur in Canada. Is it getting better? Is it getting easier? Stranger?
Oh, wow. Well, it's hard to say. I mean, I've never really done anything else. So for context, you know, I've been a social entrepreneur for 28, 29 years. And so I can't really speak to this sort of before and after on that. But I guess, you know, when I was writing the book, I interviewed over 100 social entrepreneurs, mostly from Canada, but some in the United States. And I guess the trend that I'm seeing is women, other equity-seeking groups, folks just really fed up with the status quo, not feeling like they belong in corporate kind of mainstream, and really wanting to do something with their values. And that was something I believe it was Tina pointed to earlier. And so very much that, and feeling empowered. I think there's a growing number of role models and resources, and even things like the Women's Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, like that didn't exist. Like when I started, I didn't even call myself a social entrepreneur until I attended the Social Venture Institute for my first time in like 2000. Like I didn't even know what that, you know, would have meant. I was just somebody who was bringing my feminist values to bear on earning a living for myself, you know, in a way that I thought was sustainable. So in the space in terms of manufacturing, I mean, just an incredible emphasis on sustainability. I think people are becoming, you know, extremely mindful about climate change, and especially as somebody who works with textiles in, which I believe are the second most polluting industry in the entire world. So, you know, really great technological innovation happening on that front. And that's something that companies like ours are driving and just going, look, we have to do better. This really needs to be cleaned up. And yet there are a lot of tensions. Like, I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. I mean, you know, it's almost like being a social entrepreneur is kind of like doing a triple Lutz of small business, because not only do you have to do all of the same things that any other form of enterprise needs to do, you need to, you know, identify your customers and make a good quality product or service and find them and tell them about it and get Armin to help you, you know, define your brand and your value proposition so that people get it, and it's got to be at the right price, and then you've got to find your people, and you've got to, all these things. And then as a social entrepreneur, you've got to do it while being exactingly sustainable. You know, we're a founding Canadian B Corp, and the amount of data that we need to keep track of, and that we do keep track of, is incredible to verify. To Tina's comment, you know, there's a lot of people out there just saying, hey, we're green, hey, we care about people, and that kind of thing. And I think that with the rise of B Corp, and so many organizations, Buy Social Canada is a great example of this as well, where it's like, well, how green are you? And what do you mean by that? And how do you verify that? So I think there's much more of a drive towards transparency, which is great, but it also places an incredible amount of additional work on the social entrepreneur. So, which is not to say it shouldn't be done, because it absolutely should be, but I think I just want to point to it as one of the people who, you know, works towards compliance and verification and transparency, and doing all of that, is it's absolutely backbreaking on top of, you know, managing a staff of 10 or 15 people, manufacturing products, you know, and all the rest of it. So I feel hopeful, but I also feel really challenged. And I would, if you wouldn't mind circling back later, because I'm going to stop talking here. I'm just so excited to be here and just enjoying this so much. But I do want to talk to this notion of data and verification, and ways that I think that it can become more widespread and rigorous in a creative way. So I'd love to circle back to that when we can, PK.
Yeah, so thank you for raising that. Definitely we'll circle back, because accountability and selling that, or having that accountability, and also helping social entrepreneurs know how to measure their impact. The fact that that's not been heavily sort of supported or done may actually contribute to the fact that it's only 1% of our economic fabric right now. Okay, so I see a question in the chat, so I'm just going to put this out here. Someone asked, Janice asked, how do large enterprises like Amazon and Etsy help or hinder social enterprises? So my approach to this is, I'm just going to ask each panelist to just say, help, don't help, or not sure, or depends. So Natasha, help, not help, or depends?
Depends.
We'll get back to it. Depends. Okay, Madeline.
Yeah, I think it depends as well. And I would contrast Etsy and Amazon as being quite different as well. And I would say in the case of Amazon, it doesn't help, and Etsy is depends.
Okay. Ermine, help?
Yeah, same too, depends. Yeah.
It depends. Okay, Anne.
Yeah, same answer as Madeline. Amazon doesn't help. Etsy can help, not always.
Not always. Okay, we're going to circle back to that one afterwards as well, but I just wanted to give Janice a little bit of a sense of where your minds were, might be on that question. I want to turn our attention to procurement because we're mashing together those two things. So the Canadian government has made, set asides for all kinds of social and equity seeking entrepreneurs and sectors and industries and so on. And with some success and maybe not as much success as they hoped. The number, is, I think, still around 5% and trying to grow to 15. So let's talk about procurement and how it can help the sector grow and how it could help your enterprise grow and what role it can play in strengthening the sector. Because let's face it, government does a lot of spending, and that number that Tori put up was just the federal government. If you include provincial and municipal, there's a lot of money there that can be directed at helping support the social enterprise sector. So let's go to you, Natasha. You've worked with government agencies in procurement and other institutional organizations. So how does it work for you? What's the world of procurement look like in reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, procurement is money, right? And so actually this ties right into that question about how large corporations can help, because we found directly a lot of them say they want to help, and they want to help by giving you maybe some free server space or like giving you some mentorship. But at the end of the day, we want them to buy from us. So when they do, it helps. And when they just talk about it, it doesn't help. And it's the same thing for government. So we've been selling directly into the public sector for a few years now. And we found that at the beginning, it was just impossible. And what has worked for us is to get government grants. We won a prize early on through Grand Challenges Canada that was USAID funded. And that was really important because what it did was basically serve as the first level of vetting by a federal agency. And so then we were, when there were opportunities for the service that we offer for our software that came up, our name was put forth. And so that's happened a few times, and it's been really important. And we're going to be announcing this publicly in a few weeks, but are working really closely right now with the State Department and the states, like on a national project that happened because of that initial grant. But at the same time, selling directly into government is virtually like impossible as a startup. We've just found, we've tried here in Canada, we've tried at the city, at the provincial, and at the federal level, and we get all these great intros and they don't go anywhere. So what we've found to be effective in other countries is to really either get grants and kind of work our way in from the side, or else to be very aware of what the procurement thresholds are for like single source bidding and just kind of slide in that way. So I think those are, my 2 tips as well.
Okay, let me do a quick follow-up question. How did you find out about the single source opportunities? Where did you go to look? It's been mostly from free labor at first, like going through innovation contests where you get to win the chance to work with the city for free, that kind of thing. And so like really it's all about relationships. And I think that's why like access to that upfront investment capital is so important, because selling into government is quite slow. So I'm going to ask one more follow-up question because I think it'll be of interest, which is, so it sounds to me like you're the entrepreneur trying to open the doors of government, yet we have government saying they want to use their procurement dollars to support entrepreneurs like you. Where's the disconnect? We have a willing player, but all the work is on the entrepreneur side, it sounds like.
I think there's two ways it could be approached. One is to really set a minimum threshold. We are going to spend, 5% of government spending by this amount on social entrepreneurs. And because there's no accountability right now. Like there's this will out there, but there's no accountability around there. And there's no specific numbers, like hard numbers around it. So if you set a threshold and then you have people whose job it is to get people connected in the door and following up with them, I think there might be an opportunity there.
Okay, great. All right, let me go
But
to
I'd love to
Madeline.
hear what others have to say. Yeah.
Madeline, you've been thinking about procurement as a smaller enterprise, and this question. So let me ask you, what are some of your experiences with institutional government procurement over your life as a social entrepreneur?
I love that question. Okay, I would say that things really have been changing very dramatically, very recently. So just as a real-time example, 2015 was coined by Newsweek as being the year of the period. So we've seen a cultural sea change thanks to menstrual equity activists and for-profit social entrepreneurs like myself and my business partner, who have been really trying to raise this issue. Menstruation is a social justice issue for decades. So finally, we're starting to see, you've got to provide menstrual products in schools. That's just happened in Ontario. It's happening in BC. It's happening in California. It's, civic bodies, countries, Scotland. There are a lot of really great examples right now of this menstrual equity movement taking hold. So how does that play out in terms of procurement? It's really interesting because if you think about the mindset shift that is occurring on this one issue, it's really quite seismic. Like we've gone from thinking collectively and culturally that the responsibility for buying menstrual products lies solidly with the individual. You bleed, you buy, basically, right? And what we're actually coming to understand now is that in much the same way as I wouldn't expect to have to bring my own toilet paper or my own hand towels, my own soap into a bathroom anywhere, because it's a matter of basic, human respect and decency and dignity for somebody to provide that for me, whether they're a university or an employer or a civic body or whatever, or a library. Menstrual products belong in that kind of perspective that, like, of course, and they should be free. So awesome. So what we're seeing now is like post-secondary institutions coming to us and buying large volumes of products because they recognize that, just for folks who don't know this, ISLE specializes in exclusively reusable menstrual care products. So we don't sell anything disposable. Lots of other people do. But we just do it that way because we believe in it. So institutions who have to buy at scale for tens of thousands of students or employees or citizens or whatever, are looking at the volume of purchasing that they're going to have to do on an ongoing basis of disposable products and the waste management and going, wow, like that's really intense. And so we can demonstrate the value in the benefits of purchasing reusable products from a sustainability and a cost perspective and a lot of things. And I still haven't got to the data thing, but it's a really exciting example of how feminist activism has directly influenced procurement at an institutional level that we are just starting to see bear fruit in real time.
Great, thank you for that. All right, Hermine, over to you as a founder of a small enterprise yourself and working with somebody with businesses like this. We talk a lot about procurement in terms of institutional by directing public money towards entrepreneurs who have businesses that advance social equity. But what about small businesses themselves? And have you noticed some of your clients? Do your clients have social procurement policies that they are aware of, and do they actively go out and seek to buy from other social enterprises? And that's kind of where Buy Social might come in as well. So what are you noticing in your space around companies also thinking about social procurement between themselves?
Yes, I would say especially since last summer, because some of my clients were people who contacted me because they were trying to diversify their suppliers. And yeah, this is something I've seen. And also, I would say on a more personal level, even when I collaborate, like the way I see procurement for me, it's either whether I'm trying to find a new client or new collaborator, like contractors that I work with. So I really tend to, and like people in my network, we really tend to work with like-minded people who also self-identify as social entrepreneurs to really leverage our impact together and help like clients that we work with. But as a small business owner, I will have to say for me, it has been challenging because I started looking into procurement as a way to drive business and business growth. And sometimes some of the processes, when we're like a small business owner, sometimes it might be challenging, but I have seen things changing and companies and corporations trying to diversify also their suppliers. So sometimes when I hear about projects, it's through my network. So sometimes it's not even from the website. It's someone who knows me, who referred me, and because they were looking for a marketing agency that can bring a new lens to what they're doing. So networking, also like having a great network and being able to connect really help in this industry.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you. And I have to go to you as we're talking about buying and selling from institutions and government and things like that. You've been with the United Way, and of course your other affiliations. What have you noticed in terms of matching buyer and seller? Like where, is it happening well? What are your thoughts around the matching process?
I think when we're talking about governments, large corporations, and institutions, there's a huge mismatch between their processes and Irmeen, you just mentioned it, their processes and the capacity of small businesses. And most social enterprises are small or medium businesses. And for them to have like a 75-page RFP land on their desks that's full of legal language, and then have to respond in their own 150-page bid, for something that they may not even get, is a huge, huge challenge. And I think that one of the processes that we've been trying to do is to break that down. So we're not actually asking governments or institutions or corporations to purchase directly from social enterprises. We're asking them to incorporate it into their entire supply chain so that the social enterprise will slot itself into that supply chain where it makes sense for them to do so. The challenge there is making sure that that happens, is matching up the capacity of social enterprises with what is being purchased and who's doing the purchasing, because there's such a long supply chain for a lot of these folks. They have, tier one is the first level, and then there's tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, and so getting social enterprises into one of those tiers is a challenge. But we've been working on this for 15 years now, and we are seeing some changes. We are seeing, as you said, PK, there's much more willingness, much more talk on the part of governments. I think it's breaking down the processes where the rubber hits the road, and so that's the piece we have to keep working on, is just breaking down those processes. We've talked about unbundling a lot as well, which is where instead of a multi-million-dollar contract, you divide it into its component parts, and you have maybe $500,000 contracts instead. But again, that is a challenge on both sides. A $500,000 contract is still big for a social enterprise, and for a government to have to manage multiple $500,000 contracts instead of one large one is difficult. So we still have a ways to go, but I'm definitely seeing progress. I definitely agree. I think, Natasha, you're the one who said having targets, it makes a huge difference. So when an institution says, we want to do this, and we want to make sure that $3 million of this package is spent on social enterprises, then that is more likely to happen than just kind of an airy-fairy, we're interested in social procurement, but we're not sure how to go about it. So that makes a big difference, is setting targets and being really clear on what the institution or the government wants to accomplish.
Yeah, and just on that thread, what advice do you have for the folks in the audience if they are social entrepreneurs? How do they even find out about these opportunities? You know, where do they go? What do you advise? And I'll ask the rest of the panel to chime in.
The easiest thing is to join one of the supplier councils. And I recognize that in itself can be a barrier, but there are several of them. There's 6 national supplier councils, and Bisocial Canada is one of them. So if you fit Bisocial's criteria, then I would highly recommend getting certified by them, because that's exactly what they're doing. They're certifying social enterprises and working with purchasers to accept their certification as evidence and get the people who are in their database into the approved list of vendors for those organizations. But there are also 5 others. There's WEBE, the Women Business Enterprise one, which might be appropriate for a lot of your audience. And they do the same thing. They're looking to match up their members with corporations and institutions. So that is probably, I would recommend that be the first thing you look into. But it might not be for you. It might be, it's a expensive process to be certified. And some of these supplier councils charge a fairly hefty membership fee. I would start local. Look at who's in your environment. What are the large organizations, large corporations, institutions, and your municipal government, and just really look at what they're doing, what they're saying in their corporate messaging in terms of social procurement, and go in through that door and look for those thresholds that Natasha mentioned, because they really are critical for a small business. You want to find, you know, if it's $3,000 or $20,000 or whatever it is, you want to find where that low threshold is, where the purchaser can single source. And then you have to build a relationship with the organization, with the person who's doing the single sourcing. That's the most complicated part, but that's it's a hard slog, but that's the way you do it. I don't know if I'm not an entrepreneur, so I feel really bad giving advice to entrepreneurs, but but I'm seeing you guys nod your heads. So
yeah, it sounds like the first step is relationships, right? Is to go and see who's in your ecosystem, knock on the door, have the conversation, and build out. It's basically a sales call, I guess, is what you're saying. Exactly. And let me turn to Madeline, and I'm also going to ask Ermi and Natasha, what advice do you have for entrepreneurs in the audience around how to get some of that money? Go ahead, Madeline, you can start off.
Yeah, no, I'm learning right now, so I don't feel like I can really teach. Like, I mean, until now, we've been a direct-to-consumer brand for the most part. And so, man, it just feels like dancing with elephants. Like, even trying to have a conversation with the University of British Columbia is just madness. And you know, I've been bounced around. Is it housing? Is it wellness? Is it the Women's Center? Is it, you know, like sustainability? And it's been really hard. So being able to connect with the BC Federation of Students, for example, has been helpful. Like umbrella organizations are kind of what I look for now. I've sent in my application to Bisocial Canada. Please, Tori, we're the real thing. And so I really am learning, but it's also, it really is about that social capital piece and about developing relationships. And that's what I'm finding. And it's something I happen to excel at, and just don't take that personal touch for granted. Phone someone, get in a meeting, tell them your story. And the other piece that we're finding really compelling is having value offering beyond the products. And what I mean when I say that is a couple of things. Number one is education. So, you know, if we're talking to a school, we say, hey, we've got these great educational booklets. And, you know, if I'm doing a webinar next week with Humber College for about 250 students who are about to try reusables for the first time. But we also provide data to customers as well. So we can provide them with environmental data, because we've done the work to understand what are the implications of reusables versus disposables. And so just really understanding that it's not just about solving the question of helping people with periods manage them. It's about what are the institutional needs in terms of reporting on ESGs and how can we support that. And so that's turned out to actually be a really important differentiator for us, that we can, say, okay, if you buy 1,000 reusable menstrual pads for your students, then this will be how much greenhouse gases are saved, and this will be the volume of waste diverted. So that's another tip, is to sort of think beyond what the value transaction is for you and to what it can be for those organizations in terms of reporting and data.
Okay, terrific. Ermine, what advice would you have?
Yeah, so I would say I'm still learning and strategizing, but something that worked for me recently is, and I was able to break into a new segment of new clients. It's when you do the work for a client and then you try to look for people who are in this kind of same category. And something I learned, for example, working with nonprofit, there is they have a time where they get funding. And then when they get funding, they need a contractor or an agency as quickly as possible. So knowing those timelines and building those relationships early on, so when they have the money, they will come to you, and you won't miss that timeline, because then after it might be too late. So it's also understanding those cycles and how they, especially with nonprofit, that was really helpful.
Okay, great, thank you. And Natasha, just your advice?
Yeah, I think it's really a sales question. But what I found is, for social entrepreneurs at the beginning, what their story is their most valuable resource, right? You don't have a lot of capital or team or branding, but you've got your story. And if you can make other people see your story as part of their story, they're like, we're buying from this company that's doing this, this, and this, get them jazzed on it. That's everything. But I would also flip the question, because I think there are even more things that government can do. For example, what if they gave out grants saying these grants are only available to be spent from businesses to procure from social entrepreneurs? Fifth Wave Connect did that, which was fabulous, giving extra money if you bought from others, from women and BIPOC-owned businesses. It's brilliant, then you really look around who's there, and then you start that relationship. So you might spend the first $1,000 because it was a grant, but then you have this new procurement relationship. And I think that also acknowledges one of the responses and comments in the chat, that oftentimes the price is higher for social impact products, and that's because there aren't all those hidden costs. So if we can get the public sector to take on that differential in those hidden costs, that's everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I want to thank Lori Farley for that question, which is in the chat, which is about, if the procurement strategy by governments, let's say, is the lowest price, then that's a whole question. That's probably not a social way of going about paying for products and services. So that's a whole other, that's something to consider as well. All right, we only have a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to round this out just in terms of a question around what you would like to see, government or research institutions do more of to advance, to help, to make it more possible to buy from small folks. So what's missing in the system? What do you want to see happen to help open the floodgates, I guess, with what did we say? $370 billion in procurement from the federal government alone. A small amount of that could go to that 1% sector and really strengthen it and help those enterprises grow. But what would you like to see happen next? So let me start with you, Ermine. What would you like to see?
Thanks, PK. I think what Natasha was talking about, I think it's an amazing idea. When you get your grant, and if you have some incentive to actually get your services from social entrepreneurs, I think that will be really helpful. And also a way for us, when I was part of the Fifth Wave Connect, it was great because we were among our peers and like-minded individuals, and we know right away, okay, I can go to Natasha for this, I can go to this person for something else. So having those connections and some incentive to like buy from each other, that would be great, I think.
Great. All right, wonderful. Anne?
Yeah, I would pull that even further back, Almeen, and say incentives throughout the system. So not, there's challenges with the way that procurement people are incentivized. They get rewarded if they get the cheapest price, basically. Not always, but for the most part. So build in those ESGs into the whole procurement process, not just in the corporate social responsibility department, but make it part of the reward system, the incentive system for people who are doing the procurement. So that's just one little thing I'd like to see.
Great idea. Madeline?
Yeah, I really love the way Tori spelled it out earlier in terms of adding on social, like we're not just buying stuff and we're not just buying it at the cheapest price. We are seeing this as an opportunity to create substantial social and environmental and economic change all in one go. And if people really understood that that was the true opportunity of what they were doing, I think they would look at it differently. Whereas if they just believe that they've got to get the cheapest price and buy the most, and that's their job, and it's framed that way, it's just so soulless by comparison to doing something kind of heroic and amazing. And so if those values were understood as an integral part of just the process, and that it was meant to be that way, that should be the new definition. And I would also encourage tapping networks. We're not just looking for individuals. Like I think about PK, the CEO network that we're part of, and hopefully a few people, and Natasha and others on the call are part of. Like that's run webinars to help like the hundreds and even thousands of entrepreneurs and activators understand how these processes work. And then also, per the point that was raised earlier about the 75-page application and all that, that's real. And I was nodding on that. So it's like, think about how can maybe do some, user group surveys on like what's the easiest way for the entrepreneurs to engage, as opposed to going, this is our form. Hey guys, look, here's our form. Here's our form. It's like, if I can't complete that form, if that's not something that's accessible to me, then it's, even the fact that I know about it isn't enough. So I think a really concerted, mindful effort to engage and to recalibrate what's going to work best for the social entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Yeah, perfect. I think the philanthropic sector is having similar conversations around grant applications that make it very difficult for small organizations to access those opportunities because they're so weighty. All right, we just have 2 minutes left. I see 2 questions in the in our question box. One from Monique Burke that says, how do you get funding as a startup nonprofit before launch? And another one from Cheryl Labar, who asks specifically for Madeline, what would you say is the most important factor for a small startup apparel brand to focus on? Basically, the idea is they're in her first year, and she's feeling like it's because there's so many social goals to pursue that she's trying to figure out which one can she focus on, because she can't solve sexism, colonialism, and eco-justice all at the same time, which we all try to do. I totally hear your question, Cheryl. Because of lack of time, I'm going to ask Madeline, is it all right if Cheryl contact you specifically, and Anne is typing an answer to Monique. Others feel free to type an answer into Monique and Cheryl Labar's question. And if anybody can help Monique with funding, Monique, maybe you want to put some contact information in the chat. So all of us could probably help you with a little bit of that. So with that, 1 minute to go. I just want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for being part of this panel today, but also all the decades of work combined all of you have put in to the social enterprise space, creating it, having it have a voice and help shaping it, which has led us to this panel here today. Thank you so very much. I too am optimistic that things will change and get better. I wish it was faster, bigger, farther, however you say that, but at least it's moving forward. And finally, I just want to say, I am an entrepreneur. What am I saying? If I am, The takeaways for me were about procurement contracts for big companies and governments are not going to drop into your lap. It's a sales call. You got to go out and make the conversation and build the relationships. Hermine pointed out timing of which, and data, right? You are also selling not just a product or service, but people want your data. And if you can wrap that into an offering, you'll have a better chance at securing a good procurement contract from governments in particular who are trying to advance those things too. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to WEC to close us off. So thank you so much, everybody.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. This was a fantastic conversation. I'd like to express our sincere thanks to all of you who joined today, to our speakers for graciously sharing their time and expertise. I hope everyone found this session as helpful and as informative as I did. We would love to hear your thoughts about today's discussion to help us serve you better. A link to a follow-up survey will be posted in the chat and sent to you this afternoon via email. I invite you to follow WEC on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, and to keep an eye out for our bi-weekly newsletter for the latest news and opportunities for the women entrepreneur ecosystem. And please join us in the next installment of the Demystifying Procurement and Diversifying the Supply Chain webinar a week from today, as we learn more about Canada's digital marketing, emerging efforts to increase the diversity of bidders on contracts. Thank you once again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.